to do the transaction with that, then there arise the deadlock. So there will be a waiting session where a particular people only can enter at a particular moment, then only the next person can enter. Okay, so this deadlock will have a system, that is it is a set of transactions that every transaction in the set is waiting for another transaction. So in this particular word itself, it is clear that every transaction is the set is waiting for another transaction. Okay, so now there are a set of transactions. Whatever the transaction you are going to do, so it's going to wait for another transaction in the particular set. Now consider there are two types of transaction, T1 and T2. So what is the concept behind this deadlock? Deadlock is if there is a set of transaction, that every transaction in the set is waiting for another transaction. Okay? Every transaction in the set is waiting for another transaction. So assume that there are two transactions, T1 and T2. So based on this, we are going to write one transaction A and then another transaction B. Okay, so there are two transactions where you can get n number of processes. So suppose A is going to read and B is also going to read, or A is going to write or B is going to write. We are going to check with all the scenarios while doing the transaction 1 and 2. So the procedure is every transaction in the set is waiting for another transaction. So this will surely come in the MCQ. Okay, so what is called a deadlock and what are the different transactions to be carried out? That is, every transaction in the set is waiting for another transaction in the set. Okay, so if this is the case, then we have a schedule with the deadlock. So what is called schedule? So whatever the process you are going to do, you are going to have a schedule. Example, if I am going to if I am going to do one job, okay, so if a job is going to take about 15 to 20 minutes, or assume that it takes about 4 days means, so in the 4 days I have to conclude that job with the prescribed time also. Okay, so I have to schedule that job in such a way that it is going to complete in 4 days. So I will split the time as well as labor based on that particular work to be done. Okay, so I will schedule one by one. That is, after first is grinding, then mixing, then shaping. Okay, like that I will schedule the job one by one. Now, so while scheduling this deadlock, what happens? I'm going to have a process in which it's going to state that this particular job will be written in a particular A. Okay, assume that I'm going to do a job in A and I'm going to wait until it is going to be completed. So there arises a lock. Okay, so if I'm waiting for a particular product and I'm not able to complete means, then why? Because the particular A time is also is locked by the B. So what happened? There arises a waiting session. So until A is going to be completed, B has to wait for that particular process to be done. Then only it will be completed. Or in another case, if transaction, in case of transaction 2, if lock X on D is there, then the B will be written. So it has to wait for log X on A. Okay, so until the wait process is completed on A, the lock is completed on A, it has to wait. Okay, so then only the B section will be implemented or it can be run. Okay, so in the same case, so now you have a simple example for transaction 1, 2. Okay, so assume that there are 2 transactions. Now a student is coming and he is holding the particular transaction, means the student will have to hold transaction 1 and you want to see the grade of that particular transaction. Okay, so you want to see the grade. So again he is holding the transaction 2 also. So in this case the transaction in this case the transaction 1 and the transaction 2 will have a request to the students that I am going to send this data. You please wait. I will send the data. Then you can activate. Okay. Again, the transaction 1 also send the same request that you please wait. I am also going to send the data. Once I send, then you can write. So the 2 requests given by the transaction 1 and 2 to the student and grade will be accepted at similar intervals of time. So the student transaction S1 is going to hold the transaction. Okay, once it is hold, then the transaction 2 is 2's request is accepted and that particular transaction will start its output and it will give the result. Okay, so like this, transaction 1 and 2 is going to send the request and the response to that particular student or grade. It will hold and then it will send the result. At last, what happened? So the transaction which is holding that particular T1, if it is holding student, then the transaction 2, the grade will be generated and the result will be implemented. So after holding grade 1, the student request will be generated and again the transaction 1 will be generated. Like this, the request and response between both the transaction will be hold and then it will be activated. Okay, now deadlock handling. How we are going to handle the deadlock? So actually we must not enter into a deadlock. Why? Because if we enter into a deadlock, then there arises a lot of problems. It will give you a similar problematic situation, right? To avoid this one, but what we are going to do is deadlock preventions has to be taken. So now to prevent these strategies or prevent these deadlock handling, we have 2 types of approach. Approach 1 and where these 2 approach are going to have a particular transaction logs to be locked before that particular execution is going to happen. So all the logs in one step or no lock or lock, or none of the transaction is locked. Okay, either one transaction is locked or none of the transaction is locked. Okay, so in this case we are going to check with the different approaches. So there are 2 approaches to prevent the strategies. So in these strategies we have data items. So where one transaction can be locked or none of the transaction is locked. So this is actually each transaction locks all its data item before it begins. Okay, so we have to lock all the transaction before it begins. Either it has to lock in one step or it will not lock. Okay, see, these are the 2 required things which has to be seen in the deadlock handling. Now, so what are the disadvantages of this deadlock handling? Right. Disadvantage is we have to predict what type of transaction is, when it will begin and when it will be closed, and what are the need of the lock and data item utilization. So from the lower stage, we have to check the utilization of the particular transaction, and we have to predict that whether it can do the deadlock before or after. Okay, so it has to need to be locked at least once, or if not, if it is needed, then it has to be locked. If not, we can we can say that there will be no deadlock. But the main disadvantage is we have to predict before itself whether that particular transaction has to be locked or not in the very low stage. Okay, next step. Assigning a unique timestamp at each transaction. How to assign a unique timestamp? So there are wait and rollback. So there are two transactions are there. One is wait and another one is rollback. Okay, so these are the two timestamps. So wait and the rollback. So these are the so two schemas are there. Wait to die. Wait die schema, wound wait schema. Okay, so keep in mind of this one. So it will surely come in a MCQ. Okay, so one is wait die schema and wound wait schema. Okay, so we will see in detail way. So now what is wait die schema is, it is a non-primitive technique. So non-primitive technique in the sense, so if a transaction Ti is going to request a data, then the current item has to held by Tj, right? So held means it has to be put back, okay, or stop. So until T1 is allowed to wait, so only if the timestamp smaller than that of Tj, okay, so it will be as a timestamp only if it is smaller than of a Tj. So here what is there? There are Ti and Tj. Okay, two things are there, Ti and Tj, where the timestamp is going to happen. So Ti is allowed to wait only if it has a timestamp that is smaller than of Tj. Okay, Ti will allow only if it has a timestamp smaller than of Tj. So it must be a smaller, then only it will have a. So in that case, if it is a smaller, then Ti can be rolled back or dice. Rolled back or a dice. Okay, so this is how the Ti will have the rollback or a particular dice. Okay, so older transaction we wait for the younger one actually. So this might be the older transaction. So older transaction might wait for the younger transaction or a younger release of the data item. So that is called as younger transaction. So old will wait for the younger one. Okay. So in this case, so Ti is request a data to the current Tj. Okay. If the timestamp is smaller, then the Tj, if the timestamp is smaller than the Tj, then Ti will roll back or dice. Okay, so that's why it is called as older transaction may wait for the younger one. Okay. Right. So next one is never wait for older one. So when it never wait for older one, since it is a rolled back instead. Okay. Since it is a rolled back, it may die several times before acquiring the need of the data. So the transaction will be happened or it will not happen. Okay, in two sections. So when it will not happen, if it is rolled back, then the transaction will not exist. Okay, this is this is a die state. Okay, if died means the transaction will not be happened in the rollback state. Example, I will take T1, T2 and T3, which have a simple time sign, that is 5 to 15 respectively. Now we are going to, if T1 request a data to be held by T2, so between T1 and T2 we are going to find how it's hold back the data and how it's going to wait and the request. Okay. Now T1 wait till, then if a T3 is requested data by T1, then T3 will be rolled back. Okay. So T1 is what is the thing is going to explain in this one is, so T1 will first request to T2. Okay. So after requesting, T1 will wait. T1 will wait. Then another one T3 is there. So T3 again requests the T2. So while T3 is requesting T2, T3 will be rolled back. Why? Because already what happens, T1 is waiting. Okay, so that T3 is rolled back. Okay. Okay, we'll have one small video session regarding this, how this deadlock is going to happen. Okay, then again we will continue the session.
Protocols, also two-phase locking has the risk of deadlocks. So we need strategies for deadlock handling. To understand what deadlocks are, let's consider the following scenario. Let's say that we have transaction 1 obtains an exclusive lock on A. Now concurrently, transaction 2 obtains an exclusive lock on B. Now after some time, transaction 1 wants to obtain some lock on B. Shared or exclusive, doesn't matter. This lock will be blocked because transaction 2 has an exclusive lock on B, so no other locks are allowed. Therefore, transaction 1 will have to wait until transaction 2 unlocks B. Now let's say that transaction 2 tries to obtain a lock on A. Again, it doesn't matter whether shared or exclusive, because transaction 1 holds an exclusive lock on A, this lock will be blocked. So transaction 2 is waiting for transaction 1 to unlock A. So both transactions now are stuck. Transaction 1 cannot progress. It waits for transaction 2. Transaction 2 cannot progress. It waits for transaction 1. Both wait for each other indefinitely. So we need the detection of deadlocks in order to resolve such situations. And the resolution is that one of the transactions must be aborted. One way to perform deadlock detection is via wait for graphs. The nodes of this graph are the transactions that are currently running. And we have an edge from transaction 1 to transaction 2 if transaction 1 is blocked by a lock held by transaction 2. So the source of the error waits for the target of the error. So the system constructs this wait for graph on the fly and periodically checks whether there are cycles in the graph. If there is a cycle, we have deadlock. And we resolve the deadlock by aborting one or more transactions on the site. However, this is not as easy as it sounds because the selection of the victim is challenging. If you're selecting young transactions, then this might lead to starvation. We might abort the same transactions over and over. If you're selecting old transactions for abortion, then we're throwing away a lot of computational investment. The simplest strategy for deadlock detection is via time analysis. We simply define a maximum number of time that the lock request is allowed to to be blocked. After this maximum amount of time, we assume that the deadlock has occurred and we abort the transaction. Clearly, there's a lot of dangers with this approach. We have to choose the timeout very carefully, and still there is a risk that we abort transactions that are actually not deadlocked.
Now let's talk about deadlock detection. Now this is very important when we talk about deadlock detection, because there is only one way, that is wait for graph. Now this is the method to detect the deadlock. So what will happen in this, let's see. So G is equal to V comma E. So this is just for the understanding part. G means the graph, okay. V means the vertices representing the transaction. E means the set of edges, shows the dependency of the transaction. So let's see example. First example we have is T1 to T2, T2. Now these are the vertices T1, T2, and this arrow is the dependency. So V comma E. So this was the wait for graph. So this is the first graph, this is the second graph. Now my question to you is, which graph is in deadlock? Either this or this. So what's the answer? Answer is, this is not in deadlock, this is in deadlock. Why? Because the condition says if we have a cycle, if a cycle is present, this means that the system is in deadlock. Now for here you can see the cycle is T1 to T2 and T2 to T2, but we don't have T1 to complete the cycle. So this is not in a cycle. Cycle means that we have a complete cycle. You can see here T1 to T2, T2 to T, and T to T1 again. You can see there is a complete cycle. So if there is a cycle present, the system is in deadlock. If there is no cycle, you can see here we don't have cycle. So system is not in deadlock. So it is a deadlock free system. Now let's see how we can recover. So recovery from deadlock. Now you know how to detect the deadlock by the wait for graph, right? But now the question is how we can recover. See, we have that condition T1 depends on T2 and T2 depends on T1. So how we can recover from that deadlock? So the very first one, and is the basic thing. We have to select one victim. Suppose T1 is the victim, and we have to kill that. What will happen if we kill that? You can see if we kill that, T2 can successfully execute. And this means that we have recovered successfully from the deadlock. Now the question is how we can identify the victim. So the points to select victim are here. We have 4 points. There can be many points. The important 4 points are here. So first point is the cost of the transaction. Second is how many more transactions would be affected by its rollback. Third point is how many data items it has blocked. Fourth point is how much time it needs to complete transaction. So basic meaning is what is the cost of that transaction, high or less. Second is how many more transactions. So in that wait for graph, how many more transactions would be affected by its rollback. Third is how many data items it has blocked. So less number of data items or greater number of data items, we have to see that. Fourth is how much time it needs to complete that transaction. Less time or more time. So these are the key points we have to note. So the second point is rollback. We have 2 types of rollback. Now this is the recovery method, and we are in the second point. We have 2 types of rollback, that is total rollback and partial rollback. When we talk about total rollback, this means that victim is selected and after that it is terminated completely. But when we talk about partial rollback, this says we have selected the victim, right? But we have rollback up to a certain point so that it can break that deadlock. So this is the effective way. Partial rollback is the effective way to break the deadlock. We are rollbacking the victim, but up to certain point. So let's take a quick recap. First point, we have selected the victim, and there are some conditions to select the victim. Second point is the rollback part. There can be total rollback or there can be partial rollback. The effective way among them is the partial rollback. Why? Because victim is selected and it is rolled back up to certain point where it breaks the deadlock. But in total rollback, victim is selected and it is rolled back completely. Third point is starvation. So the third point is starvation. So what the starvation says, you are rollbacking some transaction, but make sure that the same transaction is not rolled back again and again. Not rolled back again and again. So this will lead to starvation if it is rolled back again and again. Suppose I have selected this transaction and I said rollback. In the second time, I have selected this transaction and said rollback. So this transaction will never get a chance. This means it will starve. So this we have to avoid. So I have put a cross here. Same transaction should not be rolled back again and again. So this we should keep in mind when we talk about recovery of deadlock. Okay, अगर आपको मेरी वीडियो पसंद आ रही, now the solution for the deadlock is either we can prevent the deadlock. Now if suppose deadlock has happened, so what we can do is we can detect the deadlock and we can recover from it. So there are two types of solution for the deadlock. First, we can prevent the deadlock. Second, if deadlock has happened, then we have to detect it and further we have to solve the deadlock. Now deadlock prevention. You can see we have 2 points here, advanced locking and ordering data. Let's talk about advanced locking. When we talk about advanced locking, this means that transaction should lock data before execution. So before execution means advanced locking. So before execution, we are locking the data items which are required by the transaction. So there will be no deadlock condition in future. So it is the prevention of deadlock. So let's talk about the second point, that is ordering data item. Ordering data item means here you can see we are locking the data item that is at random. We can order that ascending or descending. This is ordering of data item. The meaning is the same, like transaction logs the data item, but now it is in order, like ascending order or descending order, and it's also before the execution. So advanced locking with ordering data item. Third point we have is timestamp waits. So in that we have two topics, wait die and wound wait. These are very important topics, so let's understand it carefully. In first, you can see wait die we have. If timestamp of Pi is less than timestamp of Tj, then wait. Who will wait? Pi. Pi waits. Else Pi is rolled back. So let's understand this. Timestamp of Pi is less than timestamp of Tj means what? Pi is older than Tj. If younger transaction comes, then timestamp would be greater of the younger transaction, obviously. So if this condition happens, then Ti should wait. And if Ti is greater than timestamp of Tj, then it should roll back. This means it should terminate and restart again after some time. Terminate and restart again after some time. So this is the important part. If less, then wait. If greater, then roll back and restart after some time. But when we talk about wound wait, it's something different. See, if Ts, that is timestamp of Ti, is greater than timestamp of Tj, then wait. Yes, if it is greater, then it waits. Who will wait again? Ti waits. We can see that in wait die, if timestamp of Ti is less, then Ti waits. But in wound wait, if timestamp of Ti is greater, then Ti waits. But here is the interesting part. Else Tj is rolled back. This means that Ti kills or wounds Tj. So Tj is killed or wounded, so Tj terminates. If Tj terminates means Tj is rolled back and it is restart after some time. Let's take a quick recap. See, wait and die, wound and wait. Two conditions, so we can have only two conditions in the question. So Ti is less than Tj, first condition. Ti is greater than Tj, second condition. So I have used if and else just for the simplicity. So if Ti is less than Tj, wait. But in wound and wait, if Ti is greater than Tj, then Ti waits. Important part, you have to note that. Else Ti is rolled back, but else Tj is rolled back. Why Tj rolled back? Because Ti kills Tj, or let's say wound Tj. So Tj terminates. Now the last point we have in deadlock prevention is timeout based. So what happens in timeout based? We have transaction. Now this transaction waits for fixed time for any resource. Let's say resource X. If transaction fails to get that resource, alright, in a given time, it fails to get that resource in a given time, then transaction is rolled back and it restart after some time. Alright, so this is the time out based. If it gets that resource in that particular time, then it's okay. But if it fails to get that resource, then it is terminated and it is restarted again after some time.
Okay, we have seen the same example in a different way. So there are asking that there are T1, T2 and T3 as well as if this particular time as a timestamp of 5, 10 and 15 respectively. Now T1 requests a data to held by T2. In that case, T1 will wait and T3 requests a data item by T2. Then in that case, T3 will be rolled back. Okay, so here wound wait scheme. Okay, wound wait scheme. So what is wound wait scheme actually? Younger transaction will may wait for the older one. So this is the main concept. The younger transaction will wait for the older one. Now this is a type of primitive type techniques where transaction 1 will request a data item currently for T1 to Tj. So T1 is requesting the Tj. So T1 is allowed to wait. T1 is allowed to wait until it has a timestamp larger than the Tj. That is, Ti must be greater than Tj. Ti must be greater than Tj. Otherwise, Tj is rolled back. So this is the main case. Otherwise, Tj will be rolled back. So rolled back, it will move to the previous stage. So it forces the rollback. The older transaction wounds actually forces the rollback of a younger transaction instead of waiting for it. Okay, that's why younger transaction may wait for older ones. Okay, so this is the thing. Then another example also for a T1, T2 and T3 which have a timestamp of 5, 10 and 15 respectively. Now what happens? T1 requests a data by T2, then the data item will be printed from a T2. Now what happened? While it is requesting the T2, now T2 will be rolled back. If it is printed, then the T2 will be rolled back. So obviously the T3 request will be held by the T2 and T3 will wait again. Okay, since it is a printed from T2, T2 will be rolled back and the T3 request now waited. Okay, T3 request will be waited. This is another example of the transaction T1 and T2 and T3 for different timestamps with 5, 10 and 15 respectively. Okay, so now we have deadlock reductions. So what are the different types of deadlock reductions? So in the deadlock reductions, we have a wait for a graph. So what is this wait for graph? So we have to consist of a pair of G. So graph G equal to vertices and edges V and E. So G graph equal to vertices comma edges. Okay, so if this is the case, now if T and Ti and Tj are there, okay, now what we are going to do? We are going to find out whether Ti and Tj is in E or not. E means edge of the graph, okay, edge set. So we are going to have a direct edge from T1 to Tj. So we are implying that Tj is waiting for Ti is waiting for Tj. So now we are releasing a data item. So after it is waiting, we are going to release the data item. Now the system is actually a deadlock state. Why? Because only if the wait for graph cycle must invoke a deadlock reduction algorithm periodically to look for the cycle. Okay, so this will also come in the MCQ, just to make a note. Okay, next. So as we see the diagram also already, so wait for graph is without a cycle. Where without a cycle? So just see that it has a T 25, 26, 27 and there is no link for 27 to 28. So there is no continuation in the cycle. So there is no cycle continuation. Okay, so half cycle is there. So here wait for graph with a cycle means, so here 25, 26, 27 is there, then again 27 to 28. So there arises a full cycle of this particular graph. Okay, so that is the way for graph without a cycle and with a cycle. Now, how to recover from this particular deadlock mixing? So how to recover? So here we are having solution for the rollback. Okay, to break the deadlock. So for that one, we have three actions to be performed. That is selection of victim, rollback, and starvation. Okay, selection of victim. So what is the selection of victim? So there will be a set of transactions, deadlock transactions. So for that one, we have to determine to roll back to break the deadlock. If we roll back, then it will break the deadlock. So we have to see that the cost is also minimum. So while rolling the deadlock, we have to decide whether the transaction must be rolled back or not first. Then how far this transaction should be rolled back, we have to see whether one rollback is enough or two rollback is needed. Okay, so we have to see that one for a rollbacking. So total rollback and partial rollback are there in case of a rollback system where star. Okay, so based on that, how much rollback is needed. Okay, we have to decide that one for deciding a particular transaction, whether how much it can be rolled back, and the transaction should be rolled back only to that extent. Okay, based on total rollback and partial rollback. Now, starvation. So starvation is going to pick a victim. So what is that victim means? Which is the damage state? It will pick that victim to finite number of times. Okay, that is called as starvation. This will also come in the MCQ. Now, interlocking. So how the interlocking will done? So intent locking will is an ancestor of it will put all the ancestor. Ancestor means the pioneers. Okay, pioneer node, the oldest node, that is called as ancestor of the node. So before it is this node is locked explicitly, it will have a intention mode whether it is explicitly locked is being done at the lower level. Okay, it will check that one. Then only it will put a lock. Now, based on this, we have different types of intent lock. One is intent shared lock, exclusive lock, shared lock, and exclusively shared and exclusive lock. So these are the different types of lock in which this particular ancestor, the intent lock are going to put on all the ancestor of a node before that node is going to be locked explicitly. So we have to lock explicitly it has to be done at a lower level of the three items. Okay, the lower level itself we have to have this type of intent lock. Right. So intent lock will have a locking that it has shared mode, that is explicitly locked, and whether we have to read that particular suppose the transaction T1 is going to read the record of the file, then we have to need to lock the database and finally lock that particular mode also. Okay, so this intent exclusive lock is also a lower level of tree where it's going to lock, or shared mode lock is going to be happened. So shared mode lock is partial sharing. Okay, so partial lock will be happen, or full lock will be happen in case of intent exclusive locks. Now, next one, shared intent exclusive lock. We have the set of node is going to lock in that particular shared intent, and the exclusive router lock will have a shared mode which is going to pick that lock explicitly and lock that particular intent. Okay, so that is called a shared lock. So exclusive lock actually cannot tolerate any concurrent access to all R. Okay, you cannot tolerate the concurrent access. So we have to go with that. That is the case of an exclusive lock. So share lock, it can share and it can lock that particular node. Okay. So these are the lock capacities where suppose assume that there are two transactions, 1 and 2. So transaction 1 holds a lock of the given type. So transaction 1 is here, it holds the lock now of the given type. All the requests being granted. Once the request is granted, it locks all the transactions from T1 to T2. So T1 will going to wait for lock R1 and T2 wait for lock R2. Okay. If both the things are going to wait for the locking, then there arises the deadlock situation. Okay. So in this case, so this assume that there are resource 1 is there. Okay. And for this particular resource, there are another resource 2. So 2 processors are there. Now processor 2 wait for a resource 1, but resource 2 will assign to process 2. Now here resource 1 assigned to process 1 and it wait for resource 2. Okay. So in this case, it arises the deadlock. So this diagram is also important. Just make a note. So based on the diagram also, the MCQ questions will be arised. Okay. So there are a different set of summaries. We will share this slide also to you in the later session. Okay. So we will conclude the session in this deadlock process. So this is how the resource 1 and 2 is there. So at the same time, it's going to wait for process 2, and resource 2 is going to assign means to the process 2 itself. So there arises a deadlock. Here also, resource 1 assigned to a process 1, and process 1 is going to wait for resource 2. There arises a deadlock. So both the things is going to do the assignment to the particular process, and again it's waiting means it arises a deadlock. Okay, clear? Okay, we'll see the next session. Okay, Punithan and Asha just send me that.
Okay, sir.
Okay, thank you for joining. And be safe, ma. Nowadays, corona is spreading like a it's spreading very much. So be safe and take some precautionary measures. Okay, be safe. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.